Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend some of your very valuable time with me as I talk about the board games that I played and acquired in the month of July 2023. Now, this month completely blew every previous month out of the water in terms of total games played. I played 30 unique games in the month of July. We'll talk about why in a minute here. And I did manage to acquire a few things, mostly in digital form, but I did manage to pick up some new stuff. And since I have so much ground to cover here, I don't want this video to be too long. Let's just get right to it. Let's start off with my new purchases, and then we'll go to the games played, going in order as usual from my lowest rated to my highest rated games of the month. Now, even though my financial situation is still a little more precarious than I'd like it to be, I do have my Patreon supporters who are helping me out a bit every month, so I was able to take some of that money and pick up a few things for myself. So as a result, I want to send a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, especially to my higher tier supporters, Abe O, Mojo Dam, Joanna, King Booty, Saver Girl, and my highest tier supporter, Osmanda's Perfect. Thank you so much for your support, which has allowed me to pick up the following items. First of all, I made my first crowdfunding pledge in 5 years. I stopped pledging on crowdfunding campaigns 5 years ago for a couple of reasons. One, I'm just not financially in a position where I can loan a game company money to hopefully receive a product in a year or 2 or 3 or however long it takes them to make that product. And secondly, between the conversion rate of my Canadian dollars and the costs of shipping these days, it is just way more financially sensible to wait for the game to show up in retail on store shelves and pick it up when it shows up than to actually pledge for it on crowdfunding, unfortunately. However, for the huge success that the game Planet Unknown has been for both Paul and myself, and the fact that I regretted not having supported it on Kickstarter so that I could get the Kickstarter exclusive Planets and Corporations, when they came out with their latest crowdfunding campaign to fund the expansion called Planet Unknown Supermoon, plus adding in all those extras that I didn't get from the first Kickstarter campaign, I decided that I would do what I haven't done in years, and I would submit a pledge on GameFound. It's also the first time I've pledged for something on GameFound. In the past, it was all Kickstarter for me. So whenever it comes out, I am looking forward to receiving Planet Unknown Supermoon and those extra planets and corporations, and also I purchased some of the plastic upgrades for the components too, because they look cool and we played the game a lot. So that's something I got back to in July. Now, one thing that was happening in July was my annual uncles and cousins getaway that we always do in the summer, that has traditionally been a camping trip each year up until this year, when we finally managed to get a big Airbnb and stay indoors away from the mosquitoes and bugs and in the comfort of beds, which was fantastic. But prior to going on that getaway, I thought I wanted to pick up a little kind of group party game that would be fun to play with a large group of people. So I stopped into my friendly local game store, CNC Gamebridge, and once again, Jeff and the staff there just absolutely spoiled me. I went in there with my younger son, Wyatt. He had just had a dentist appointment, and Jeff, just out of the kindness of his heart, said, "Well, I'm proud of you, Wyatt, for having a good dentist appointment. Here's a Transformer. Just let him have a Transformer for free, no charge." And I ended up picking up the game Just One to bring along to this little getaway, and he gave me a discount. He said since I had missed their anniversary discount sale, he would sort of retroactively apply that discount to my purchase there. So once again, the people at CNC Gamebridge continue to treat me so well. If you're ever in the Cambridge area and you want to look at some game and hobby stuff, some paints and whatnot, please do check out CNC Gamebridge. Just as a side, I didn't actually get Just One played during this little getaway, although we did play several other games, which I will get to momentarily here. Another thing that came up in July was the Steam Summer Sale, so I picked up several board game implementations in electronic form on Steam. I picked up Hive plus the extra bugs so that I could play some solo Hive against the AI. I picked up Steam Rails to Riches. I'm looking forward to playing that now that I see that title again. I kind of forgot I had it. I really would like to play that again. I picked up Agricola, All Creatures Big and Small. I kind of accidentally picked up Horizons of Spirit Island, thinking that it was just kind of a Spirit expansion pack to add more spirits to Spirit Island. I had forgotten, though, that Horizons of Spirit Island is its own standalone game that's kind of a bit of a stripped down, simplified version of Spirit Island that is made to appeal to a wider mass market. And so on the one hand, anybody who's interested in Spirit Island, do check out Horizons of Spirit Island, because the full Spirit Island game is quite a complex game experience. And even Horizons of Spirit Island is not a really simple game. There's still a lot going on there, so there's still a lot to dig into if you're a newish game player or don't play a lot of games and are interested in that particular cooperative game. It's a good version to check out. But on the plus side, I did get to use the spirits from Horizons of Spirit Island with the rest of my Spirit Island full game that I have on Steam. The downside being that all the new spirits there are low complexity spirits, so they don't present a big challenge in terms of their gameplay for an experienced player like myself. And then finally, I picked up a game called Dwarf Romantic, which I thought was the board game version, because in the past year, I guess a board game version with the same title was released, and it won some, or it was at least nominated for Spiel des Jahres awards, I believe. But as I'll talk about shortly here, it turns out that I picked up the computer game version of that game, thinking it was a board game. But anyways, the last sort of purchase I made was, thankfully, a few of my wonderful viewers responded to my call out for opponents to play games with on the website Board Game Arena. And when I saw that there were people that were interested in playing games with me, I decided to purchase the Board Game Arena premium account so that I could play some of my favorite games like Mr. Jack and other games like that. So yeah, other than that one game found pledged, basically it was just a bunch of quite cheap, mostly electronic purchases on Steam. Alright, let's get right to game plays and see how fast I can get through 30 games here. Again, go in order of lowest rated to highest rated. So, at our Uncles and Cousins Getaway, we did play several games like I mentioned. One of them was a game called Muffin Time, which somebody had brought with them. It is a big card game that you're supposed to play with a group of people, and the goal of the game has to do with ending up with a certain number of cards in hand, which can change as cards are played. As things come on the table from other players, the game state changes a little bit. It's kind of designed to be one of these kind of wacky party-ish game experiences where kind of weird stuff is happening. I just couldn't wait for this game to be over. It was just so bad. But on the flip side, I just enjoyed sitting around the table with my nieces and nephews and knowing that they were having a ton of fun, and just being able to be there with them and sharing that experience with them was enjoyable. It was fun in that sense. The game itself, though, a 2 out of 10 for me. Just absolute garbage as a game, but great to spend time with people I love. Next was this Dwarf Romantic game that I played on Steam. And like I said, I thought I was playing a board game. I didn't really bother to look into the rules too much. I just kind of started playing it. And the game kept going and going and going. I started it one evening when I went to bed. And as I did well in the game, it postponed the game end. So the better I did, the more time I had to keep playing. Next thing I knew, about 2.5 hours had gone by, and I was just finally getting to the end of the game. So, yeah, obviously I wasn't playing the board game version. By the end of it, I was kind of sick of the game, even though it started off being kind of fun and interesting. By the end of it, I was like, okay, I'm done with this. I rate the game a 5.5 out of 10. So that being said, I would still be interested in trying the actual board game version of that. Next up was a game on Board Game Arena that one of my very close friends started for the two of us to play. It's a game called Bandito, which is a card game where you start with a single card on the table that has either 5 or 6 tunnels leading off of it. You have a hand of 3 cards that each have various tunnel configurations. You basically play one of those cards, draw a new card, next player plays a card, draw a new card, and you're trying to cooperatively close off all the tunnel exits, because some of the cards are dead ends that shut off the tunnels, and so you're just trying to basically get all the tunnels shut off before you run out of cards in the deck, and you're playing cooperatively together to do so. But it's just so lucky and random in terms of what cards you happen to have in hand. Half the time you just can't help but adding a card that creates even more tunnels than it closes off. Actually that happens more than half the time. That's most of what's happening. And I guess you're trying to play it so that your tunnels are kind of coming together so that you can hopefully draw the exact lucky card to fill in the final gaps. I mean, it was fun to be able to play with a good friend who lives on the other side of the country. Although I just rate the game about a 5.5 out of 10, and even that's being pretty generous. I think in my editing I might actually lower that a bit more. Going back to the uncles and cousins getaway now, one of my nephews brought a game that I had played quite a bit some years ago called Machikoro, and he had the Machikoro 5th anniversary, which as far as I could tell just had plastic coins. I couldn't see any other differences trying to remember back years ago to when I played this game. It's interesting that this is the first game that a publisher had actually sent me to do a written review of. So I did this big written review on Board Game Geek of Machikoro, and going back and looking at the review again, I actually made myself laugh with some of my dumb jokes in that old review. So it's basically one of the first games where you're starting with a small selection of cards, you're rolling dice, trying to match them up to your cards to gain money and purchase more cards and grow up your kind of village there to accomplish your goals through dice rolling. And it was so fun to get back to it all these years later. I guess it was 9 years ago that I last played it and wrote that review. So it was fun to get back to it 9 years later, play it with my nephew and some of my other family members. In looking back at the records I kept to write that review, I don't think I've won a single game after 16 plays, and that didn't change on this particular getaway. I still managed to lose a game when we played at the getaway. And despite the fun nostalgia of getting back to the game and playing with these wonderful people, the game itself isn't great. I rate it 6 out of 10. It's pretty luck-based in terms of what you roll on the dice and happen to get. There's also a pretty nasty mean streak to the game where you can collect buildings that really kind of harm other players, which I don't particularly love. And since the release of Machikoro, there have been a few other titles that have emulated that kind of gameplay and iterated on it. There was first Valeria Card Kingdoms, and then Space Base came along, which has been fairly highly praised. There's another game that I wasn't at all familiar with until I was looking into this, called My Farm Shop. And then the most recent one is a game called Bad Company that's also supposed to be pretty good. So, I mean, I'd certainly be interested in trying one of the newer games like Space Base or Bad Company, but I'm not super interested to get back to Machikoro at this point. This leads on to another game we played at the getaway called Prohi, and it's a game that I had brought with me, hoping that I'd be able to play it with a small group of people. We did manage to get 3 players together to play it, which is about the minimum I'd want to play this game with. I think the sweet spot would probably be 4 players for this game. I wouldn't want to play with less than 3. I don't actually know if that's even possible, but it's a game that has been described as Sheriff of Nottingham Light, although I myself have never played the game Sheriff of Nottingham. But it looks like it's supposed to be kind of a stripped down, kind of easier to play version of Sheriff of Nottingham, where you're trying to smuggle convoys of goods to deliver to your warehouse to score points at the end of the game, but other players are holding cards in hands that might consist of inspectors who can inspect your convoys and try to find these illicit goods to take them for themselves to add to their own point scoring at the end of the game. So it's a game a little bit of bluffing and trying to sneak stuff past players. It's pretty fun. I enjoy the game a fair bit. I give it a 7 out of 10. And I'm happy to keep it in my collection for now. With the next game, we get back to Board Game Arena, where I was able to play a game of Splendor with one of my favorite booktubers, a fellow named Chaz from the channel Bookish Chaz. And we played a 2-player game of Splendor, which is just a very solid little kind of engine building game where you are collecting resources to then spend those resources on cards, which then allow you to kind of build up this engine of greater purchasing power to eventually get the higher point cards and reach a certain victory point level first. It was so fun to play a game with Chaz. He lives in the US, so I mean, it's not like we'd be able to see each other in person. And he's just such a great guy. I've enjoyed interacting with him through the booktube medium, but to be able to play a game with him was a ton of fun. Splendor, it's like I said, it's a good game. I give it a 6.5 out of 10, but there are better games that play in a similar manner. Games like Century Gollum Edition, for example, is a game that I would pick over Splendor. And in fact, if you have any suggestions for kind of light engine building games along these lines, I would love to hear about that, because it is a really cool concept for a game anyways. This next game is a game that I brought along with a visit to my mother. I took my boys to see their nan and brought a game of Indigo along with me. And we ended up playing 2 games of this kind of route connecting maze-like game where you're playing these tunnel tiles to then move the gems on the board along the tunnels and trying to guide those gems towards your sections of the board, where when the gems go off in those sections, you get to keep them for points at the end of the game. Although each section of the board is shared with one other player, so you're going to kind of have to share points with another player when you manage to acquire a gem. So it's just a really cool, simple kind of route building game that is fun to play. What's funny is both games that we played were won by my youngest son, Wyatt. He managed to beat his older brother, his dad, and his grandma in both plays. I rate Indigo a 6.5 out of 10. It's a very simple to learn, very quick to play game that you can just kind of pull out and play a quick game of and have an enjoyable little experience with. And then next was my monthly doctor's office plays, where I'm sitting in a waiting room playing a game on my phone app. I played another game of the Santorini app on my phone. The app is really well done, and Santorini is just a fun little abstract strategy game of trying to get your character to build up to a 3rd level of the wall and then get one of your characters to climb to that 3rd level before your opponent characters manage to do so. So you're kind of building walls and moving your characters around and trying to block your opponents. It is a really good implementation on the phone app there, so I managed to knock off at least one more game of Santorini in the month of July. And my boys were next very excited to get back to a game that has been their #1 game of all time for years now, or at least it was 3 years ago when we made our video of my boys' top 40 board games, I think it was. We did a little series of videos of their favorite games, and they both listed Arcadia Quest as their #1 game of all time at that point. And if it's still not #1, it's definitely still high up there for both of them. And we finally managed to finish the final game of the Arcadia Quest Riders campaign. So now we have completed 4 full campaigns of Arcadia Quest. We did 2 campaigns of the base game. We did one with the Pets expansion. This time we actually finished up the Riders campaign. So that means we have played 24 games of Arcadia Quest. It's a big game co-designed by Eric Lang, where players have these heroes that are running around a dungeon, chucking dice to kill monsters and collect treasures. And as much as my boys love it, I'd be so happy if we never play this game again. For one thing, the setup takes forever. It's a huge game. The takedown, obviously, quite long as well. And then the game itself, you're just moving a character, chucking dice, trying to roll well. Move again, chuck dice, try to roll well. And you're doing that for a couple hours at a time. My boys are asking about getting another expansion. There's like this big Inferno expansion for it, I think. And I'm like, please no. But overall, I'm going to sort of compromise with my rating by giving it a 7 out of 10 rated as a family game. Even though if it was a game rated purely for myself, it would be much lower. But because it's given me just dozens of hours of really fun time with my 2 boys, and they have enjoyed it so much, the game deserves, I think, at least a 7 from my own experience. Next, we'll head back to Board Game Arena, where a wonderful viewer of my channel had set up a few games, including a game called Regicide, which I had never heard before. But turns out this is a very clever cooperative game where the designer of this game obviously took a standard deck of playing cards, including the jokers, so the 52 cards plus 2 jokers, and they just took those cards and made this really clever cooperative game out of it, where you're basically trying to battle the face cards. So you start with the jacks, you got to battle the jacks and eliminate them, then go on to the queens, and then finally the kings. And each suit in the game that you're playing cards to attack them with has different special abilities, and then each time you attack the face card, it attacks back and forces you to discard cards. So ultimately you're trying to eliminate all the face cards before you are completely out of cards and can no longer attack them. Such a clever thing to do. It's just a standard deck of cards, and the game can be played with a regular deck of cards if you don't feel like supporting the designer but buying the game, which I generally do like to do. But this viewer and I managed to get a victory with our play, and I rate the game 7 out of 10, just as kind of a solid, quick playing, easy to learn, cooperative game. And from that new to me game, we go back to an old classic favorite, which is a game called Nexus Ops that Paul had decided that he wanted to pull out and play with the two of us for the first time in several years. I've mentioned before that this style of game, this 4X game, explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate, used to be my favorite type of board game ever. And as time has gone on, I have decided that I don't really like this type of game anymore, although I still have a couple of favorites, such as Clash of Cultures Monumental Edition, that is very much along those lines. But the really great thing about Nexus Ops is it strips down every aspect of that style of game into just the most quick playing, streamlined version possible of a 4X game that really doesn't take much more than an hour to play once you're quite familiar with the game. And I guess if you're only playing 2 players, a 4-player game might run a little bit longer. But we did play a 2-player game with Paul and I, and Paul just steamrolled me, just kind of ran me over. Once the momentum started leading in his favor, that snowball just kept rolling and I got crushed. And because of that sort of situation, I think that Nexus Ops is at its best with a full complement of 4 players. With 3, you might have a situation where 2 players start fighting each other, and then the third person can kind of strengthen up and then pick up the pieces. With 4, you're all kind of at each other's throats, and it's hard, I think, for one player to gain an advantage over the others. But anyways, it was enjoyable to get back to an old favorite. The Fantasy Flight version that we played has some really fun variants in the rulebook. There are several different ways you can modify the game to your own tastes, which is pretty cool. I rate the game 7 out of 10, which is a full couple points lower than it used to be back in the day. Paul rates at 7.5 out of 10. And at least for the time being, I'm going to keep it on my shelf. I was debating whether or not to add it to the for sale pile, but I know that when I played it before with my kids, I'm pretty sure that my younger son Wyatt at least enjoyed it. Heading back now to our getaway with the family, we had a 5-player game of Concept, which is quite an interesting party game where you sort of divide up into 2 teams, plus you have one player who is the kind of coordinator of the game. And this one player who is running the game has a deck of cards with words on it. So they draw a card, they select a word from the card, and then they have to give clues so that one of the 2 competing teams is the first to guess the word. But they aren't allowed to verbally communicate. Instead, they have this big board in front of them with all kinds of different concepts on the board, like shapes, sizes, transportation, people, all kinds of different stuff. And just using plastic markers, they're supposed to put markers on various points on the board so that the 2 teams can connect all the clues and come up with the word that is trying to be guessed. So it's a very interesting kind of no communication game, or limited communication game, I should say, and trying to be the first team to connect those dots and see what the person is trying to indicate. So years ago, the only other time I've played this game, I remember coming away from it thinking, it's an okay activity, but is it really a game? This time around I realized, yeah, it can be a good game with 2 groups competing against each other, and it probably is best with at least 5 players, if not a bit more. In fact, you can, if you have enough players, you can have even 3 teams going trying to guess the clues and that sort of thing. So for a somewhat larger group, it's a pretty fun kind of party game, party activity that is kind of exciting, tends to lead to a fair bit of laughs. I rate it 7 out of 10, which certainly isn't the highest rating of some of my other party games that I enjoy pulling out with bigger groups, but it is something that I had fun with this month. Now we go on my computer, get on Steam, and I tried their Agricola All Creatures Big and Small Steam version, playing with the More Buildings Big and Small expansion. And this is a game I've played a fair bit in board game version. It's strictly a 2-player, stripped down worker placement game. And playing on Steam against the computer, I had some issues with the visuals and the general usability of the computer game format. Because there's kind of a lot of information to process and to have to keep track of, you basically end up going back and forth between a couple of screens trying to keep track of what all the resource situation's like, what your farm building out is looking like. And it wasn't the best implementation, I thought, of other games that I've tried on Steam. It's still quite an enjoyable game. It's a game that I rate 7 out of 10 just as a game in general. And when I played with Paul in the past, he's rated it 7 out of 10 too. So yeah, I'd rather play this in person than on the Steam version going forward. Although I guess if I'm really dying to play it again at some point, I do have it there available to me. And then speaking of kind of larger group, party-ish games, fun experiences, we played a game of Skull. Actually, we played a couple of games of Skull at our family getaway, which is an extremely simple, straightforward game of bluffing. And you're basically starting off with 4 round coasters. They look like drink coasters, but one of them has a skull, the others have flowers, and all you do on your turn is you either secretly place one of your coasters onto the pile in front of you, or you call out a number of cards that you are willing to flip up from the other players, or from yourself and from other players. The trick is, though, if you are successful in turning up that many cards, before you can actually go and do that, other players can outbid you in terms of the number of cards that are being flipped up, and whoever bids the highest has to flip up that many of cards, starting with their own and then going to other players. If they turn over all flowers, then they win that round, and you only have to win 2 rounds to win the entire game. However, if at any point you turn over a skull from another player, or even from yourself if you're really not paying attention, then you lose that round and you have to randomly discard one of your 4 coasters. So you might actually lose your skull, or you might lose one of your flowers, and then you're down to 3. And then the more you lose, the fewer coasters you have in available to play, at which point you might actually run out and be eliminated from the game before somebody gets to the 2 victories. So it's a very straightforward. You're just putting a coaster down and at some point deciding how many do I think I can take a chance to flip up from what's in front of people. And it works well. It's pretty funny. And one of my nieces was an absolute shark at this game. I think I ended up playing 2 games with fairly high player counts, like maybe up to around 6 players, even 7 players. And my 12-year-old niece, I'm pretty sure, won both of the games that I played. So it was pretty funny and a pretty fun game. I rate it 7 out of 10 just as being just a light, enjoyable experience. Next we go to a classic push your luck game called Port Royal that myself, my younger son Wyatt, and Paul all played together here at home. This is one that I was excited to get back to because it's been quite a long time since I've played it, and it really is just a game of pushing your luck as pirates, trying to flip up cards one at a time, deciding when to stop, hoping you don't bust out. Gradually, as you purchase more cards and acquire them, getting stronger and able to deal more cards before possibly failure happens, and ultimately racing to get to a certain number of victory points. So it was fun to play this with 3 players. That's a great number for this particular game. I think 3 to 4 players would probably be the sweet spot for this one. I rated it 7 out of 10. I'm not sure if I have Paul's rating. I'm going to have to maybe put that up on screen here. When I asked Wyatt what he would rate it out of 10, Wyatt said he would give it a 7 out of 10. But the most amazing thing about this game of Port Royal that we played was Paul pulled off the most incredible victory, one of the greatest moments that I've seen in all the years I've been board gaming. Basically, when a player reaches 12 victory points, you complete the game round, and then whoever has the highest number of points is going to be the ultimate winner. So you are doing well if you're the first to 12, because it might be then hard for another player to surpass you in that final round of play. But what happened was I reached 12 victory points. Wyatt didn't manage to exceed that, and then Paul was only at 8 points, so he was 4 points behind me, and in his very final turn he had to flip up exactly 5 ships, one of each of the 5 colors, without basically getting sunk by the cannons on them. But he somehow managed to succeed in doing so, which allowed him to basically take 3 cards as a reward, and ultimately he jumped from 8 victory points to 13 victory points. And it was just the most amazing moment just to see him just flipping card after card after card and managing to not bust out and getting those 5 different ships that he needed to pull off the win. It was really quite something. In July, we also, at Wyatt's request, got back to Raptor again, this 2-player Bruno Catala game of being the dinosaurs versus the scientists. I continue to fiddle with the balance of the game by giving some advantages to the dinosaurs so that Wyatt has a chance of winning the game, because he always wants to play the dinosaurs. And not only are the dinosaurs our harder side to win with, but Wyatt has less experience with the game than I do. So still fiddling with that balance a bit, but Wyatt just has fallen in love with this particular game. I rate it 7 out of 10. It's okay, but I am glad Wyatt loves it because it does give me a chance to get it to the table. In the past, when I've played it with Paul, he's rated it 6 out of 10. My other doctor's office plays for the month were playing chess on my phone app. I thought I would go to some kind of easy difficulty levels and play fast, see how that worked out for me. Although both times I attempted to do that, I still lost on time because I just can't play chess fast. There's so much information to process that I just know that if I rush it too much, I'm going to make some terrible goofs, because even when I think a long time, I still make terrible goofs. So anyways, I rate chess 7 out of 10. Still definitely enjoy exploring that game. Next, I had my friend Mark over to play some Magic the Gathering. I had decided that I was finished purchasing Magic cards. I've just got so many cards and so many decks. I got enough cards to last a lifetime. And I'm really just not cool with Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast and their recent policies. Things they've been doing have just been mind-bogglingly awful, and I just don't want to support them. And then along came the Lord of the Rings Magic set, and my moral indignation kind of got shoved off to the side, and I picked up some of the Lord of the Rings decks and ended up building a couple of decks of Lord of the Rings cards. One was a Hobbit deck that I called Second Breakfast, that was all about acquiring food that could be then devoured to gain life. The other one was the evil side of orc armies and Saruman's power. And Mark and I pitted my two new decks together, and we had the most epic game of Magic that lasted more than an hour of just this back and forth, where my evil side just kept coming after these hobbits, and the hobbits were getting beat down, but they would eat some food and gain some strength again. And I would just come after them again, and they were just hanging on until finally they got some strength and were able to then come back at me and ultimately overcome me in a close score at the end of more than an hour of play. And it worked out so really well that I was quite pleased with my two new decks. And curse you, Hasbro and Wizards, for making me give you more money. Making me. Anyways, these Lord of the Rings cards are just right up my alley. They just speak to my heart. So yeah, well, there you go. Anyways, moving on now to Shadows in Kyoto, which is a game that I played the previous month, I think, or the month before, with Paul. I pulled this one out with Evan. This is like the mini Stratego thing where we have our little two sides of secret agents that are sort of trying to get across the board and capture each other and that sort of thing. Played it a couple times with Evan. I was happy to play this with Evan. I rate the game 7.5 out of 10. When I played it with Paul previously, he gave it a rating of 7.5 out of 10. I'm always happy to pull this one out and keep exploring the intricacies of its strategies and that sort of thing. Moving from brainy to physical now, at our family get-together, we played a bunch of games of Clask. So Clask is this little wooden game where you have a magnet under the board that is controlling the magnetized piece on top of the board, and you're just trying to sort of bang a ball into your opponent's net. There's a few little magnets on the board that you don't want to get to attach to your own piece because you can lose points that way. So it's just a little fun dexterity game that I had rated 9 out of 10 just because there's not really anything I can find wrong with the game. And this leads to kind of one of my difficulties with rating games, is the fact that a game like this is kind of perfect for what it is. So it almost deserves a 10 out of 10 just for being a really solid game. But it's not a 10 out of 10 game when I compare it to my other games in terms of my all-time favorites. So I used to try to overcome that in the old days when I rated games on Board Game Geek by breaking down my 10 out of 10 rating into a rating out of 5 for the fairly objective quality of the game, and then a rating out of 5 that's based purely on my personal enjoyment of the game. And so I used to try to do my ratings that way. Nowadays I've gone more to a strict, how much do I enjoy this game? How does it stack up against my other games? And so I've lowered my rating of Clash to an 8 out of 10 just to more signify where it sits, I think, in comparison to the rest of the games I've played. But it's a great fun game to have on the table to two players anytime they want to sit down and knock off a quick game and have a fun experience together. Next, I was excited because I got to pull a game off my shelf that's been sitting there for about a year. And this is a game called My City that I was trying to sort of coax one of my brothers into playing through with me and his wife. Ultimately, though, he's not a really big gamer, and I was never really successful in trying to make that happen. But Paul, of course, is always interested in trying a new campaign game, and so this is Reiner Knizia's take on a legacy style game, which means as the game progresses, we're going to make permanent changes to the components of the game that are going to affect the game going forward. So My City is a relatively simple, or at least starts off as quite a simple little tile laying game where you have these sort of Tetris-shaped polyomino tiles that you're trying to fill up your board with. And then because it's a legacy campaign game, after each game, or actually after every 3 games, because each chapter in the game is grouped into 3 games, so after every 3rd game there are new things coming into play. You're going to add stickers to your boards, you're going to bring new stuff into play in future games, and there are a total of 8 chapters, so 24 games total. And so we did the first 3 plays for the first chapter, and we both immediately loved it. We apparently both really quite enjoy these polyomino tile laying type games. Obviously, we really love playing at Unknown, and I've really enjoyed New York Zoo and games like that. Patchwork, to go back a bit further. But I rated the game 8 out of 10 based on our initial plays. Paul rated it 8 out of 10. Because it's a legacy game and it's going to change and evolve throughout the campaign, that rating also might change by the full end of the campaign. I am such a sucker for legacy games, though. I just absolutely love them. I love the weight of the permanence of the decision making that comes into play with permanently altering your game state. And I mean, I've already regretted some things that I've done on my board after the first few plays. But so far, so awesome with My City. I got Hive played a few times in the month of July. Like I said, I picked it up on Steam, so I played it versus the AI a few times, and I actually played the physical version against Evan because I brought it with me on our getaway. I have Hive Pocket, which is the perfect little travel game. The Steam version is quite good. The AI is pretty strong, so they put up a good fight in terms of their competitiveness on Steam there. I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed playing against Evan, although like chess, it is kind of a luckless, highly tactical game of unique pieces that move in unique ways. Ultimately, you're trying to surround your opponent's queen, but because it is a luckless, pretty much abstract strategy game, it really favors the experienced player, and so it wasn't super fun for Evan to play against me because I've had way more experience with the game than he has, and so it wasn't hard for me to beat him at it. But he then played it with his cousins, I think, who were more kind of at his level of strategy. But anyways, I really enjoy Hive Pocket. I think it's such a great little game that can be taken pretty much anywhere in its physical version. And now that I have it on Steam, I can play it on my own too. Ooh, the next one, speaking of returning to old favorites, one of the games I played on Board Game Arena against one of my viewers was Railways of the World. I just love a train game. I love these route building, delivering stuff type of games, and for me, Railways of the World represented the pinnacle of the genre for a lot of years. I just absolutely love the game. Ultimately, though, I ended up selling my copy, and I almost never regret selling a game, but in this case I'm like, I don't know. One of the reasons I sold it was because I had almost every expansion and every little thing that was available for it, and it felt like it kind of outgrew its already large footprint, and it made setup quite a chore, and remembering all the little nuances of all the things I've added a little bit difficult. And when I had tried playing the Steam app on my phone, I realized I was getting a very similar experience to Railways of the World without all that extra stuff thrown in, so I sold out my copy of Railways of the World, but it was so fun to get back to it on Board Game Arena again. Another game that I was able to play on Board Game Arena with the same person was Seven Wonders Duel, which is amazing. It's pretty high up there in terms of my favorite 2-player games. I made such a dumb move though in our game online. My opponent was really hammering the science strategy hard, collecting all the science tokens, whereas I was going for the victory points, and so I was way ahead in victory points and knew that if I could just get to the end of the game that I pretty much had it with victory points. But towards the end of the game, my opponent just needed one more of the science tokens to win, and it came up on one of the cards, but there were 2 cards available to choose, so all I had to do was take that one science card to prevent my opponent from getting it. But what did I do? Spaced out somehow and took the other card, and my opponent got the science card. So I'm like, why did I do that? I just clearly wasn't thinking, but my opponent played well to collect all those science tokens, so I definitely commend my opponent for very smart play there and managing to outwit me in Seven Wonders Duel. I do enjoy the game more with the Pantheon expansion that I have with my physical version of the game, and with the Pantheon expansion I rate the game 8 out of 10, but it's certainly a very good game with just the base game as well. It should be no surprise that we also played more Spirit Island this month, both in person on the tabletop with Paul and through Steam. So Paul actually picked up the Steam version so that we could play against each other even when we weren't in the same house. So we actually managed to muddle through a 2-player game on Steam, which was a little bit tricky to figure out all the nuances of making the game happen with 2 players, but we got through it. I played one of my new spirits that I picked up from Horizons of Spirit Island, which, like I said, they're easy spirits, so it didn't present a huge challenge. We ended up winning that game, but when we played in physical format, we both decided that we would play a high difficulty spirit. So each of us chose one of the hard ones, and we still pulled off a relatively easy victory. I think Paul and I have got the strategies of this game pretty well figured out, and I do have an expansion on order. I have the Jagged Earth expansion coming in from CNC Gamebridge, the local game store there, so that should add some interesting elements. And then I'm sure at some point we're going to jump into one of these campaigns against one of the nations and see how we fare with that. I rate the game 9 out of 10. Paul rates it 8.5 out of 10. And from here on out, it's all 9 and 9.5 out of 10. So we have King Domino Origins. You might be tired of hearing me talk about this game, so I won't go on about it. When I offered it as an option on one of our gaming get-togethers, Paul basically said, I'll pick it every time. And I'm like, that's perfect, because I want you to pick it every time. Even though I just keep getting smoked by Paul, it's been quite a long time since I've won this game, but my enjoyment of a game does not come with winning the game, it comes with playing the game. I rate the game 9 out of 10. Paul rates it 9 out of 10 as well. Speaking of getting smoked by Paul, we played some more Battles of Westeros as we continue to work through the base game expansion. We played this scenario where I lost 15 victory points to 3 victory points, and I only had 3 of my army units left on the board out of the 13 units I had at the start of the game. So it was the biggest steamroll we've ever seen in Battles of Westeros so far, and to the point where when we were kind of getting up to the last round of the game, I said to Paul, do you want to continue? Because it's literally impossible for me to win the game at this point. And he's like, it's up to you. And I'm like, I'm happy to play right to the end, because like I said, my enjoyment is not about winning the game, it's about seeing how well I can do despite how badly I'm doing. I enjoy that challenge regardless, and so I was like, oh, let's play it out, and we did, and like I said, things went horribly for me in the end. There's certainly a question of the imbalance of the scenarios. I will say that despite the fact that each scenario is so interesting in the way it's set up and the goals it provides for players and the way it's not just run your armies at each other and roll dice, but there's always something unique and interesting going on, I think that there are issues with balance from scenario to scenario. Having said that, though, I realize I've only won a single game of the 6 games we've played so far as the Lannister player, so I mean, I'm sure I'm not playing up to the full potential of the Lannister side. Regardless, I'm having a ton of fun with it. I really love the game. I rate it 9 out of 10. Paul rates it 8 out of 10. The game that I did manage to pull off a victory against Paul with was Isle of Skye Big Box. I was super excited to get back to this awesome game. Like I said, I won, even though I somehow managed to mess up my income stream very early in the game with not connecting my castle via roads to my whiskey barrels to get I really messed up my whole connection, and yet somehow I managed to play a certain way around it to pull off a victory. I love this game. I love that each game feels so different from the next based on whatever victory tokens you happen to pull for that particular game, the goals you're working towards for it, and just the tiles you draw. So, amazing game. I rate it 9 out of 10. Paul rates it 7.5 out of 10. The next game was a close one, though. We played Clank Catacombs again, the wonderful new version of Clank where you build the board as you explore it and progress through it. This time Paul squeaked out a victory of 178 points to 174, so it was a very close game. I rate it 9.5 out of 10. Paul also rates it 9.5 out of 10. A nearly perfect game, in other words. And then finally, the best game of the month, the one I was so excited to get to on Board Game Arena. I was so grateful to my opponent for starting a game of Mr. Jack with me. One of my all-time favorite games, easily in the top 5 games of all time for me, is Mr. Jack, or the Mr. Jack series of games, which for me the best of the bunch is Mr. Jack in New York. But playing just the base game of Mr. Jack again was so fun. It is one of the games that I wanted to play when I got back to Board Game Arena again, and also one of the major reasons why I decided to purchase the premium subscription on Board Game Arena. I could just keep playing this game over and over again, but I don't know. My opponents might not be too fond of playing the same thing again and again. So that was a month that, thanks in part to Steam, thanks in part to Board Game Arena, thanks in part to a family getaway, was just the record-breaking month that it was for gameplays. What about your month? What have you been playing recently? What have you been enjoying? With the convention season now in full swing with Gen Con and then Essenspiel coming up, is there anything you're looking forward to? I love hearing all about it, so please do let me know. Thank you so much for watching this long video. Thank you so much to those who have taken a second to give me a thumb up and who subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me. I really appreciate you. Cheers. First of all, I pledged for something. I stopped pledging for crowdfunded. I stopped supporting crowdfund. I stopped pledging on crowdfunding campaigns 5 years ago for a couple of reasons. One, my financial situation isn't in so that being said, I would be interested still in trying the Next up is a game on Board Game Arena that a friend Next up was a game on Board Game Arena that one of my very good friends put group building fun and everything of that, and keep exploring. It's interesting. When I registered, or I at least got back to my Board Game Arena